entire committee who have made our stay, our arrivals, and our entire, living here so comfortable and so warm and welcoming. I don't have words to express my gratitude to you. But first and foremost, before I begin my paper, which I'm going to dedicate to Professor Nilashana Pathak, my friend, philosopher and guide, without whom I wouldn't have been here. And she's been my guiding light for the past many, many years. And when I think of her, I'm thinking of myself and the kind of work that I would do. I get lots of inspiration from her. So I'm going to begin my presentation on the Ramanandis of Galta. I'm sorry, there's a mistake in this diacritic put under the T here. It is Ramanandis of Galta, warrior asceticism, royal patronage and tradition. Now, Ramanandis are a group of ascetics who lived in the early medieval India throughout the Gangetic plains. Ramanandis emerged out of certain intermixing of the sampradayas, and there were certain changes in the religious atmosphere of India. Now we're going to be looking at those through a little bit of peephole of history, which is going to be shown in my next slide. What you're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, is the Battle of Thaneshwar, which happened in 1567, and it was between two groups of ascetics. This is a folio from the Akbarnama, and Abul Fazl tells us that there were these groups of ascetics, some of whom he identifies as Gur or Giris, some as Puris, and the other group he does not mention. We believe that they may have been the Bairagis, the Ramanandis. Now the interesting thing here is that one could not really differentiate between the ascetics of the Shaiva tradition or the Vaishnava tradition that far back in history. We do not find any documentation of these differentiations in the sampradayas this far back. So whenever we're thinking of evolution of a sampradaya, we are talking about Ramanandis, or if we are talking about the Nath sampradaya, we are talking of them in terms that we have learned to interpret much later than this period. I'm going to be talking about sampradayas also in a while. I'm going to keep it brief and not very long, but I'm just going to bring out the pertinent points that I have observed through my own living in various stations in this country and through my interactions with many ascetics of many traditions. As alchemists, healers, or maybe spies, or sometimes we also find mentions of them as bankers or merchants traveling through the length and breadth of India. We find mention of Gosai merchants and bankers a lot in the pilgrimage places because they collected taxes there. And they also owned a lot of land. Now how did Gosais or Vairagis come to own land in these places? It is because of the various edicts granted to them by various kings, so that their inheritance was ensured. And it is a very interesting phenomenon that you would observe in places like Rajasthan or Garhwal, that the kings ensured that the property of a Vairagi or a yogi would go only to their legatees, and it will not be distributed amongst the larger mutt that they belong to. So in this manner, Gosais or Vairagis came to own a lot of property of theirs. Now what they did with that property is another matter, but this is a very, very clear indication that wherever you find yogis, you will find kings. So there has been a lot of discussion on whether the yogis and the ascetics can live together, what kind of relationship that they shared between them. But in my opinion, in India, these dichotomies have reconciled so well that the boundaries sometimes have blurred. The dialectics have reconciled with each other. Now, who is a yogi really? We are going to see this in the course of this presentation. A lot of description of the Dashnami Sampradaya that Shankaracharya put together involves rituals and rites that belong both to Shaiva as well as the Vaishnava traditions. And therefore, we find that like the longitudes and the latitudes drawn on a globe, the lines between sampradayas have also blurred. You cannot say that a Shaiva ascetic does not worship Vishnu or a Vaishnava does not venerate the Shiv. Now, this is an interesting bit, and I must acknowledge that this idea was shared by my very learned colleague, Dr. Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavalli. He said that no sampradaya exists in a vacuum. There's always an ecosystem of sampradayas which coexist. One sampradaya has a strong philosophy, a core of knowledge, its structure, it interacts with other sampradayas. So there's a lot of exchange of ideas, of traditions, and there are debates between sampradayas which we've heard about in history. So a lot of intermixing of ideas happens between sampradayas, and this is how they evolve. It isn't as if the sampradayas are a static entity. They are like living organisms which breathe, which grow, and which also merge. Now, when a sampradaya becomes very powerful, when a sampradaya establishes itself through debate, through philosophical core of it, it tends to influence other things in the society. And the society also helps the sampradaya evolve. So when we see the Nath sampradaya becoming powerful before the Ramanandis, we saw a lot of Nath influence in the daily, day-to-day routine of people's lives. When we see the Ramanandi sampradaya becoming powerful, we see a wave of bhakti and of Ramanandi ways of life being adapted and adopted into the society. Now, if a sampradaya loses out in debate to another one, what happens is it either regenerates itself by redefining itself or it wanes out. In this also, we see that a sampradaya can exist at various levels. Its core is always made up of orthopraxy, where there is rigorous knowledge, formal structure. As we go out, a sampradaya influences various traditions, so we have folk art, folklore, and as you go out of the core, there is no diminishing in the knowledge about the tradition. But yes, the practice also is rigorous, but the knowledge is preserved, but the structure might change a bit. So we cannot really say that a sampradaya arose at a particular time or it waned off at a particular time, because it always continues to exist in some form or the other in a society. Now, the Ramanandis, we get to know about their parchays as the name indicates, their parichay, their hagiographies also. We are going to be talking about Galta ji. Galta ji is situated slightly away from Jaipur, and it is in a place that was called Amer. Now, do you see a picture of a Ramanandi sadhu with an axe there? At a glance, he may have been a Shaif sadhu, but for the tilak on his forehead. The Ramanandis follow the Sri Vaishnava tradition. They worship Sri Ramchandra ji through Sita ji, the Devi who lives along with Paratpar Purush Sri Ramji in Saket Lok, always. This is a picture of another Revasa Peeth where Sita Ramji is worshipped. This also belongs to the Ramanandis. This is a photo of the current Mathadish, Shri Abheshacharya ji. Now, in the back of this group of people that you see, there is a Kirti Stambha of Ramanujacharya. Now, there has been some discussion on where the Ramanujacharyas, where the Ramanuji Ramanandis or the Ramanandis have held some differences of opinion, but that does not concern us in this paper. What I would like to instead talk about is, the tutelary deity, the Bade Sitaramji in Jaipur. Now, in Jaipur, the Kachwaha Rajputs worship Sitaramji. Now, Sitaramji exists in the form of a Shaligram who was brought by Krishnadas Payuhari ji in 16th century. He brought it to the Kachwaha kingdom, installed the Sitaramji, Narsingji and Ganpati in the Galta Peeth in Amer. Now the Kachwahas adopted these Sitaramji as Shalagram as their dynastic deity. Why did they not adopt Jambai Mata or Govind Dev Ji or Sheela Mata, who already resided in their dynastical space, their political sphere? There's a very interesting thought process that persists, behind this. The Kachwahas also carried Sitaramji on their head when they went into battle. Now, one king that requires mention, especially in the Kachwahas, is Savai Raja Jai Singh, who established these fortified townships in places like Kabul, Peshawar, Mathura, Prayag, Elichpur. Now, what were these Jai Singhpuras? They were fortified townships in which Hindus and temples could be preserved. Now, you must remember that Savai Raja Jai Singh lived in the Mughal period, where there were lots of attacks on temples. They were being destroyed. There were lots of attacks on Hindus. But each time, Savai Raja Jai Singh, who also became, he kind of allied with the Mughal forces, and he also won a lot of areas for them. But with each victory, he demanded something in return, and Akbar and the later dynasts had to give it to him. So he requested for spaces for Hindus. So whenever we talk about Rajput service to Mughal emperors, this aspect of Rajputs also has to be kept in mind, that this was a political alliance. A very interesting fact that you would find in the Mughal history is that all the Persian historians, they mention in the fact that they like to mention Rajput princesses being wed to the Mughal kings. But it is strange, it is a very strange phenomenon that you would hardly find any Rajput historian mentioning such marriages to the Mughal kings. Why was that? Now this is a ponderable that I leave to the thinking public of the World Ramayan Conference to think about. Savai Raja Jai Singh. I talked about the Jai Singhpuras. This image that I am showing you is from the Kapadwar collection of Raja Man Singh's archives in Jaipur. This is the earliest map of Ram Janmabhoomi in 1717 CE. This was one of the maps that decided the Ram Janmabhoomi case in favor of the Hindus, and this exists in the Kapadwar collection. The interesting thing is, Savai Raja Jai Singh had bought this land in 1717 CE. This was part of his Jai Singhpura. This is another map which shows a courtyard and built structure, temple sites, Babi Masjid areas. He had bought this land also way back in 1717 CE. Something that hardly comes up in national media or international media. But these families have been serving Ram for generations after generations after generations. They also derive their lineage from Kush. They consider themselves Vanshaj of Ram through Kush. And Princess Diya Kumari tells us that that Maharaja Bhavani Singh was the 307th descendant of Bhagwan Sri Ram. Now this is about the Kachwahas, their royal patronage of ascetics and the rites of ascetics. I'll touch upon a bit of warrior asceticism and then I'll wind up this paper. It is interesting that there were lots of fights between Ramanandis and Nath yogis in Jaipur. But what happened is, in some debates, the Ramanandis won and the Naths were ousted. But the interesting thing is, you would still find inscriptions dedicated to Pashupat yogis in Ramanandi temples. So, as we observed earlier, a sampradaya always remains in one form or the other. The society adopts and adapts and then changes itself. to accommodate all these ideologies. Now this is the last slide, and I've taken this from Sri Krishna Jugnuji. This is the Narsinghdwara temple copper plate, which Maharaj Bhim Singh awarded. I'll just read out a bit from this. This was granted on the day of Akha Teej. Now Akha Teej is a very significant date because Akha Teej is the date that we reserve for giving grants to Brahmins. But on this day, since it was granted to an ascetic, a Ramanandi, we also infer that this date was auspicious for giving dhan to ascetics as well. It says, Marwar Maharaj Bhim Singh Ji, Shri Ram Ji Ajay hai. This is Prasad of Shri Ganesh Ji, Prasad of Shri Ekling Ji, seal of Marwar Maharana, which is Kesar Panja. As you know, when copper plates were granted or a paper was signed along with it, Maharanas dipped their hands in Kesar water and then they put a seal of their hand on it. By orders of Maharana Bhim Singh, Mahant Devdas, disciple of Hanuman Das, is granted 20 bighas of land in village Urvasa di Sanai. He must maintain forests and water bodies as property of Raghunath Ji, Shri Giridhar Dhari Ji. So the king ensured that while he was giving a grant to a sadhu, to an ascetic, he preserved the rights of forests and water bodies for public access. It is not as if any sadhu could claim these things as their own. Secondly, the important thing that is observed in this copper plate is, he says that all this property is first dedicated to Ramji. सबसे पहले मैं ये भूमि राम जी को देता हूं और उसके बाद राम जी के बाद ये साधु के पास जाती है. That means all his property belongs to Shri Ramchandra Ji. So a king in India is not divine, it is the kingship that is divine in India. You will find similar occurrences, similar grants being made to Nath sadhus in Garhwal, where the king says that all these rights I transfer to the deity and through the deity they are coming to you. It is not I who is giving you the grant. He ends it like this, अपना दिया हुआ व दूसरों को दी हुई भूमि जो छीनता है वह 60,000 वर्ष तक कीड़ा बनकर रहता है. So anybody who eyes other people's property, may he perish, may he live like a worm. And this is how the copper plate grants end. So we observe that Ramanandis drew as much inspiration from their gurus, from their bhaktamals, their ideals, but they also drew equal inspiration from Sitaram Ji, and also the kings supported them in these efforts. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for your patient listening. Jai Siya Ram.
नई दिल्ली से पधारी रिंकू वधेरा जी ने बताया सभे भूमि को बाल की. उन्होंने अवगत कराया कि गिरी पुरी बैरागी सभी रामानंदी साधु और जिनका वर्णन यात्रा दस्तावेजों में है. उन्होंने ये भी अवगत कराया कि मठ की संपत्ति मठ के पास रहती है और वैरागी और योगी की संपत्ति राजाओं के संरक्षण में बनती गई है और उसके कारण योगियों के पास यद्यपि वे कहीं कहीं आते जाते रहते हैं वो संपत्ति बनी रहती है. शिव और विष्णु भाव को एकत्व को भी उन्होंने रेखांकित किया और संप्रदाय के जीवन चक्र को एक इकोसिस्टम के रूप में निरूपित किया. उन्होंने अवगत कराया कि केंद्रित, परिवर्धित और परिधि पर जो भाव हैं उनकी निरंतरता सदैव बनी रहती है. रामानंदी साधु से भी हमको विशेष परिचय कराया. एक चित्र दिखाकर बताया कि शैव साधु तिलकधारी है तो ये सब एक ही बात है. और रेवता पीठ का जिक्र किया, मठाधीश अवधेशाचार्य जी के कंट्रीब्यूशन को बताया और कछवाहा डायनेस्टी में कैसे वे सीताराम जी को सिर पर धारण करते हुए शालिग्राम जी की, नरसिंह जी की और गणपति जी की पूजा करते हैं. तो इस तरह संप्रदाय की अवधारणा निरंतर बनी रहती है, इसको आपने निरूपित किया कई उदाहरणों से, और यह भी अवगत कराया कि मुगल साम्राज्य में राजपूतों ने जो योगदान दिया है वो हिंदुओं की भूमि संरक्षण, उनके जीवन संरक्षण और उनके हितों के संरक्षण को करके किया है। और राम की ही सभी राज्य है, राम ही राजा हैं, इसको निरूपित किया। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद रिंकू वधेरा जी।